Welcome to NARAL's The Morning After. Each Thursday, our podcast brings you the latest on reproductive health care, progressive politics, and the fight to keep abortion safe and legal. NARAL's The Morning After is a production of NARAL Pro-Choice Ohio. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Pro-Choice OH. Enjoy the show.
I'm Gabe.
I'm Grant.
And I'm Lisa.
Hi. So we got a brand new set of guests today. Grant Stancliffe is with Equality Ohio, which is one of the state's leading LGBT advocacy organizations. Lisa Worm is with ACLU Ohio. And we're going to be talking about each of their organizations, but then we're going to get into a nasty little piece of legislation that brought them here today. So first, Grant, can you talk about Equality Ohio and just let people know how did the organization come to be and what do you guys do?
Equality Ohio was founded in 2005 after Ohio voters voted overwhelmingly to ban same-sex marriage. There was a sense after that vote that LGBTQ people in Ohio needed a central voice and a place that could be in a position to fight back threats, both political and social, towards LGBTQ folks. So 65 leaders from across the state gathered in a room, and a few days later, after deciding what was needed, out came Equality Ohio and Equality Ohio Education Fund. So our primary role is to be in places where decisions are being made about LGBTQ people so that we can speak back and represent the community.
That's excellent. Yeah, I remember 2004 more than anything. You know, the whole constitutional amendment to ban marriage equality in Ohio. I mean, it was already illegal at the time. They were just making it like super extra illegal,
right?
Which is totally asinine. But I remember that moment because we had people out there collecting, not collecting signatures. We were on the other side. We were reviewing the signatures because, you know, that year, the Bush versus Kerry presidential campaign was heating up so much. And then we had a ton of people. I was working out at SEIU at the time. And we had a ton of people who had come into Ohio from all parts of the country because they knew that Ohio was an important swing state. Many of them were gay and felt really strongly about stopping this constitutional amendment. And so, you know, there was one point where they were bringing in signatures to review. We had a lawyer who'd gotten all of these ballot petitions, but we were going to try and review them to stop this from getting on the ballot. And there was a point where somebody said, "Hey, we could do this, but we don't have any tables." And one of the guys just literally like ran to the store and ordered tables. And the next day a delivery truck came by, you know, like the big long banquet tables, the huge folding tables. He was like, no, I'm not going to let this stop because we don't have enough tables. And there was a lot of, passion behind that. And then of course, losing that year, it was a terrible election year, was a horrible setback. So, you know, when you say it was 2005, I didn't realize that's when you guys started, but that really seemed to be the point where we as a nation said, no, we need to stop this bullshit and start actively working to protect, you know, equality and respect for, you know, for all people. So
yeah, I'm actually an Ohio import, so I wasn't here in Ohio in 2004 or 2005.
It was a shitty year.
Yeah. And what I heard was that the next day, the vote was basically 66% of Ohioans voted against this. So about 2/3, right? And so I remember hearing stories of people saying, you know, they woke up, they'd, you know, get in their car, stop off for a cup of coffee and realize like, oh man, 2 out of 3 people that I'm looking at right now voted against, you know, this like basic right, you know, whether or not people even wanted to get married. It was just the fact that people were voting against the possibility of marriage and also equality. And you mentioned tables, and made me think of a conversation I was having with somebody where, in a sense, you can measure the strength and size of a movement based on how many tables you have, like how much stuff you have accumulated, how much capacity you have to actually mobilize human beings and get things done. And I think about the difference between now and 2005 when we started, and we're up to in addition to having marriage equality nationwide, but just in Ohio, one of the biggest things we're working on is that LGBTQ people aren't included in Ohio's existing laws making discrimination illegal. So what we're trying to do is get that passed at the statewide level, but also until that happens, going city by city, adding in sexual orientation and gender identity and expression into local laws, and we're up to 16 cities so far that have that in their laws preventing discrimination in employment, housing, and in public accommodations.
That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So that's the organization in general. Specifically, what brought you guys here today is a new piece of legislation called the Pastor Protection Act, which, of course, like all of these evil little bills, has a very nice name. We're going to protect pastors. What is this thing?
Well, the Pastor Protection Act, House Bill 36, is a piece of legislation that is actually a carryover from the last Ohio legislature. It's been introduced both times by Representative Nino Vitale, and what Representative Vitale says this bill does is protects pastors from being forced to marry same-sex couples.
Is that a problem that's happening in the state of Ohio?
What do you think, Lisa from the ACLU?
Well, I'd have to say, in the many times they've been asked, there is no evidence that has been happening, as well as that they are already protected under state and federal law.
Because they don't have to do this if they don't want to.
Correct. In our First Amendment, it's very clear of our U.S. Constitution that clergy do not have to marry anyone that don't align with their faith traditions. So that can be anyone from a Catholic priest refusing to marry someone who is Jewish, which is, of course, long-standing and makes sense because it is their freedom of expression of religion. So, and it's actually very interesting because the sponsor of the bill actually says that this doesn't have anything to do with same-sex marriage. And he kind of talks out both sides of his mouth by talking about the Obergefell decision, which was the Supreme Court decision in 2015 that brought us marriage equality. He talks about that
from Ohio.
From Ohio,
which
exactly.
I'm always proud to point out.
So proud.
Buckeyes brought the nation marriage equality.
And so he and other sponsors of the bill, supporters of the bill, say that it doesn't have anything to do with same-sex marriage, and that us as advocates are creating that fuel for the fire.
What?
Yeah, and this is a really strong position that we heard in particular last night during testimony about this bill.
3.5 hours.
Yes,
testimony.
It's 3.5 hours.
To discuss banning something that's already not a thing. I mean, this is 3.5 hours, basically wasted time.
Yeah, and nobody in the room has ever met somebody or heard about a court case where a same-sex couple was trying to sue a pastor to force them to marry. And like Lisa said, each time we would bring up the fact that, like, hey, the Obergefell decision happened, and now you're introducing this thing about couples being forced to marry. And he insists that the bill is not made with bias or with animus or with same-sex couples in mind. And granted, it's not in the language.
It's also not made with logic in mind, but go ahead.
Right. And but the examples he used in his own testimony and in proponent testimony were two lawsuits. One lawsuit was a transgender man who oh no, it wasn't a transgender man. It was a same-sex couple who sued what was functionally a retreat center, kind of a cottage on the lake sort of thing, because they were denied access to it to have their wedding ceremony there. And he cites that as a need for pastors to have this kind of extra legal protection, but that's not even a pastor being sued, right? And then the other example he uses, which is actually a lot more chilling, was a transgender man who sued a Catholic hospital for denying him medically necessary care. And so that shows to me that even if in the language of the law we might not see, same-sex couples, there's clearly animus intended, just in the examples that he used in his own testimony.
So you say that suit was because a Catholic hospital denied care, and somehow that's made to be an equivalency of a pastor taking place in a, so when I got married, my memory of the process was you go to the courthouse and you get the legal documents, and that's like the part that the state does. And then you go to the church if you want.
The hospital isn't usually a step in a marriage. No,
right.
I haven't heard. I mean, it depends on your thing, but that wasn't a step in my marriage.
And, this is also an example of how we are at a tipping point in our country, and that women are routinely denied care at Catholic hospitals as well.
Right.
And the national ACLU came out with a report around this issue regarding women whose lives were put in jeopardy because the Catholic hospital, said that they could not perform an abortion essentially until the woman was on her deathbed. And this is an example of the concern that we have as advocates, and especially for LGBTQ people, is that once we start down this road of talking about discrimination, especially for medical care, how that will affect the treatment of LGBT people when they go to see their doctor, when they go to the hospital. So this Pastor Protection Act seems innocuous, and in some ways it is, but it's the conversation that it starts, and it's the message that it's sending, which is what we as advocates said yesterday in committee, that this is the message that you're sending to people, that pastors and this fear that you're concocting, which it is real to the pastors, we need to acknowledge that, but that there are harms that you're participating in by sending the message with this bill.
Right.
And that takes us to the second part of the bill, which for me, I think is the scariest, in that it affords these same protections to religious societies, which is left undefined and is very broad. So we're not exactly sure what that could mean.
The bill says religious societies?
The bill says religious societies. And so when I think about the in the case of the Catholic hospital, who refused to provide a transgender man with medically necessary care, I think about, okay, well, he's citing this case. He's talking about religious societies. It's undefined. How could, and it only applies for weddings, right? It only applies for marriages. So I think about, when would you need to get married in a Catholic hospital? Like, is this even a big deal?
Right.
And then I thought, well, crap, like Jim Obergefell and John Arthur were in very much a similar situation, right? John was in the final stages of ALS, brutal.
Yeah, he was terminally ill in hospice care.
Yeah, and they had to fly to Maryland to get married on a tarmac. Yeah,
because when you're in hospice care, a plane ride is what's best for you.
Exactly. Right. They had to get donations from friends and family to get this medical air transport. And so, ironically, or maybe appropriately, the only situation I can think of where this would affect somebody is somebody who is terminally ill in a hospital and wanting to get married in their room. And so I'm not sure how far, putting religious societies in something like this really goes. Now, in terms of things like a sanctuary, a mosque, like places where people actually worship, that makes sense, where they can choose, who rents it or who has access to it.
Right.
But when we're talking about things that are really like public accommodations, like hospitals and, the cottage by the lake that just happens to be owned by a church, that is just rented, functionally a business, it becomes less and less clear, when you're allowed to discriminate.
Yeah. The hospital, I mean, if you needed to have a marriage, a wedding ceremony in your hospital room, it's not like the hospital is being asked to also provide the priest.
Right.
I mean, I've spent a lot of times just hanging out in hospitals, and just a lot of crap goes on in there, and they don't ever regulate, nobody's ever told anybody, no, you can't pray in this hospital room.
Sure.
And so if you're bringing in a member of the clergy, which is totally permissible, it's expected in many places that, oh, you're in the ICU, your clergy is going to be one of your visitors. That is an understood part of it, that they can say some kind of prayers, but not other kind of prayers, and then also sign a marriage certificate. No, that's not a thing.
Well, it would for the religious societies piece, it would be about, whether or not the Catholic hospital approves of that sort of thing, even happening in the room.
What the things that they do approve of and don't approve of. I was working for, this was when I was working with SEIU. We were talking to hospital nurses, and I had a conversation with one nurse who, not just abortion care, they were surgical nurses who attended during hysterectomies. And she said that she would go to the hospital to work, and she would clock in and she would work through her day until it was time for the surgery. When it was time for her to perform her roles attending a hysterectomy, she would literally go to the surgical room and outside clock out, step into the surgical room on a different time card, clock in, attend to the hysterectomy, which was not seen as being in the Catholic institution. It was a Catholic hospital. But that room was like, no, the church does not approve of this one room. She would attend to the surgery. When it was over, she would clock out of the surgery room and clock back in for her regular room and then finish her workday. And that was their way of saying that the Catholic Church is not participating in this hysterectomy, which, was probably not something that the woman who had to get that procedure was like, oh, well, I think I'll get a hysterectomy today. And, this was medical care. This was required for her health. So,
Yeah, the technicality surrounding that seems not the best way to provide medical care for people in need.
Right.
And, I think we're entering into I said earlier that we're at a tipping point. I guess we're probably over it because of the Hobby Lobby decision. That's why we're concerned about religious societies being undefined in this bill. And there are a few references in the code to it in general, but it depends on how it's interpreted, which is, again, what we got with Hobby Lobby and how the Religious Freedom Restoration Act tied into that as well, which is, this is part of the whole debate, like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
This is what we hear referred to as RFRA.
RFRA, yes.
Okay, so if you hear RFRA, it's Religious Freedom Restoration
Act.
Yeah, okay. Because your freedom needs restored.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, and it's actually revolves around an ACLU case out of Washington regarding employment discrimination for two Native Americans who were fired for using peyote as part of a religious ceremony. So the ACLU took that case to the Supreme Court and lost. And so Congress passed legislation called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which the ACLU supported and was signed into law by Bill Clinton. And it's been rather innocuous since the mid-90s until the issue of the day became LGBT people. And the way that we use religious expression and how it's being interpreted has changed. So the law has changed. And Representative Vitale actually mentioned RFRA in his testimony, although, again, this has not necessarily clear defining of what this would do in the bill. But there have been nationwide efforts, and it's what you've heard in Indiana a few years ago about using Religious Freedom Restoration Acts as a reason to discriminate against LGBTQ people. And so that's why this term religious societies is connected. Again, everything's connected. We're all working to stop this bill, because even though it does restate First Amendment protections, this religious society and the use of church commercial property, saying it's okay to discriminate, is something we feel like we need to draw a line in the sand now, because culture has changed. The issue has changed to the point where if we don't stop this, it will become a slippery slope.
Yeah. You say it's restating the First Amendment. It's like, as if George Orwell was restating the First Amendment, totally twisted around.
Very twisted.
Yeah. And these Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, which I don't, this isn't, you might be able to interpret part of it as a smaller version of one, but, they were intended to protect religious minorities. We're talking Native Americans and, very niche cases. And now what we're seeing is that rather than protect religious minorities, they're really protecting religious majorities, right? Right. The far right, who want to discriminate against LGBTQ people, and want to do it without getting caught or breaking the law or having any kind of recourse to them. It's basically a response to LGBTQ people being more visible in public life and in public affairs. So they went from being used, we say, like, as a shield, to protect themselves, to a sword, something that is on the offense. Right.
Yeah. I would say it's not so much protecting the majority, but it's giving.
Fair point.
I mean, they don't need protection, but within that majority, there is, a bigoted faction, and it is giving them, something to use as a tool against, there's
an element that's actively resisting the gains made by LGBTQ folks.
Yeah. Okay. So 3.5 hours last night, of were these all opponent witnesses?
They were all opponent.
All opponents. So this is our side.
Yep.
Speaking to the committee about why this is a bad idea. So for 3.5 hours, that's impressive. How many witnesses was that? That's got to be a couple dozen witnesses.
14 on the record, and I think 12 or 13 showed up.
Yes.
Okay.
And 3.5 hours is a pretty long hearing for those who aren't familiar with the legislative process. It's not typical to have a 3.5 hour hearing.
To ban something that's already illegal, or, this is when the Animal House double secret probation kicks in. It's like, no, that's already set up in the law this way. You're just restating the law, but being evil about it,
Well, and we were making the case that this is an unnecessary piece of legislation, and primarily the witnesses were clergy, members of the clergy. So the proponents were also clergy members. So, this is how the legislative process is designed. And last night, a lot of the witnesses made it clear that they did not feel threatened by marriage equality, that they felt that this legislation was sending a message of harm. And the questions mainly revolved around, well, if it's redundant, then why are you here? And the response of, well, we're not targeting LGBTQ LGBTQ people. This has nothing to do with that. So it's really hard to, when you don't address the elephant in the room, it's hard to make progress on an issue. And it's hard to feel heard when we can't talk about what we're really talking about.
Right.
Yeah, that came up more than once where, the clear sentiment was how am I going to explain this to young LGBTQ people in my church who see this for what it is? What am I supposed to tell them? And then, the refrain from the legislators and people in support of this bill was, show me where it says same-sex marriage, which it doesn't. But the clear impetus for this is because some pastors don't agree with same-sex marriage. So that tension, like Lisa was mentioning, the clear elephant in the room was there's animus against LGBTQ people here. Right. The bill also is pointless. It's a waste of time and money. We spent 3.5 hours proving all of that. And I also got the sense from some pastors that they felt a bit patronized, that, they already know their rights. For some things, they answer to the laws of man. And for some things, they answer to the laws of God. And, they don't care what the State House does. Also, why are you doing this? You can't legislate the laws of God. Right. That's up to me and my church.
Right.
And, the ACLU is there to say, and if you do try to legislate the laws of God, that we will step in and we will file a lawsuit, which is, another thing they said the legislation was going to prevent lawsuits, which you can't stop lawsuits from happening. They've kind of dropped, that was their main point during the last session of the General Assembly, which expired in December. And so that was their point last time. And now their point seemed to has shifted from, well, we're just trying to prevent lawsuits to, well, people are telling us they're afraid that this Obergefell decision is going to change and they're going to be forced to marry outside of their faith tradition. And that we need to protect them from that fear, which we have no facts or evidence of, but just in case in the future that would happen. And, and then they would say, well, where this isn't about gay people. And we would say, well, the context of the bill is as much as that. It's, just because it's not written on the words of the paper doesn't mean that's not what you mean. And they just went round and round and round. Right. That same phrase over and over again.
Yeah. And, it's on its face absolutely ridiculous, because in the man who introduced this, the man who introduced this thing cites 2 lawsuits from LGBTQ folks. Right. And Representative Ron Young asked nearly everybody in attendance, at least while he was there before he left, before it was over. He asked about local businesses and if they discriminate against LGBTQ people, if they should have to endure, the public backlash that comes, or if they should be, protected somehow. I'm not sure what kind of magic we could do to legislate public opinion, but he kept asking these questions. And so the man who's introducing this bill, people who are asking questions about it, are all talking about LGBTQ issues. Right. And then saying, no, this isn't about gay people. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. Nobody wants to get married by your bigoted pastor. No one's going to come to your church that hates gay people and say, hey, can we have our lesbian wedding here?
I mean, that would be a hell of an invitation, right? Where it's like, come for, the reception. We'll have a chicken wing bar and get a load of this pastor. We're forcing this guy to do this. Right. He hates every minute of it. It's going to be a beautiful day.
3.5 hours to discuss this. Yeah. Nobody wants to get married in your awful church, people.
And I think the other harm that this bill does, in addition to just, sending a terrible message right now, especially under the pressure that everybody is under, we're hearing from both of our organizations, from people who have been fired from their jobs or can't find housing, or denied services because of who they are. Right. And so we're sitting here debating a bill that has no evidence of harm except for the message that it sends to LGBTQ people, while we're hearing of evidence of actual harm and they're not doing anything about it.
Right.
So what are you going to tell people who are actually being harmed because they're not protected?
Right.
And they, of course, don't have an answer for that.
Right. Shameful. Okay, so there's been proponent, there's been opponent. Normally, if you get those two, then the next hearing it's interested parties, and this thing would go to a committee vote. Do we think that there's a chance that this will actually pass through the House?
I
ask you to
don't have a crystal
but
ball, but certainly we can look at what happened last time, where it did get out of committee and it didn't quite make it to a floor vote. But it was introduced very quickly. It has a low bill number. It was assigned to committee. It's already gone through two.
Right. This is mid-February, and they're a chunk of the way through the first part.
Exactly.
Which is really fast for the Ohio legislature.
Yeah. So if that doesn't feel like a priority, or
and
maybe
the House,
signal,
which is also working on the budget right now, so they actually do have other shit to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are concerned with how fast it's moving.
Okay. Yeah, we here in the NARAL office share that concern. Jamie was at the hearing; she was tweeting it. So if folks were following along, it definitely speaks to sort of that level of bodily autonomy that we believe in. Nobody's religious religious views should infringe upon what you could do, including who you marry. So we do feel pretty strongly about that. And even though our organization is a pro-choice, it does have a bit of a narrow focus to it. We feel that our supporters either already do care about this, or with a little bit of education, they definitely should. So we'll keep an eye on this one.
And if I could just interject, sorry, Gabe.
No,
we do have an action alert on this issue.
Okay.
So we'll
put a link to that in the show notes.
Yes. So you can send an email to your legislator as well as the Speaker of the House to express your concerns about the legislation and to let them know that you do not want this bill to move.
Okay. So that's an ACLU action alert. What else is the ACLU doing? You guys have had a hell of a year so far, both in Ohio and nationally.
It's only February.
Right.
So there is the National ACLU, which has made a lot of the news coverage.
Yeah.
For the great work that they have been doing on the immigration ban.
Yes.
That happened. That was pretty rapid fire. And so for the ACLU of Ohio, our part, we are preparing for the Trump administration and what has happened, especially boosting coalition work, working together in ways that we haven't in the past, because this is about unifying together. We are building a network of volunteer attorneys. These
are the folks hanging out in the airports so far.
So far.
They'll do other stuff, but that's where we've seen them. And that's totally badass.
Yes. Oh, yes. The legal observers. And this is actually something that would be separate from that. So we're starting to have trainings for people who are interested in working on civil liberties issues specifically, because and despite the national fundraising records for the ACLU, we still need lawyers. And the
good kind.
The good kind, right? And we need support, and then some. It's national ACLU so we focus on so many issues as well as at the state level. So, I work on 7 issue areas, and LGBTQ reproductive rights are 2 of my main areas. But the work that we were doing previously to the Trump administration has not changed. So, there's still overcrowding in our prisons. There's still private prison issues. There's still people being arrested for nonviolent drug crimes. There's still some juvenile justice issues that need to be handled in our schools. So, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done that will not get any easier under the Trump administration. It wasn't easy under the Obama administration, and it will continue to get more difficult, especially at the state level,
right?
With the state legislature feeling emboldened.
Right. And so in the upside of all of this is there's been a national fundraising wave to help support your organization. What I heard, and this was like the headlines, is $24 million raised for the national ACLU. Are you guys seeing a nice boost, wave of support similarly here in Ohio?
We are seeing a boost, not $24 million.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But I think we're seeing a boost of members. So, these are people who sign up for emails, or, just being aware is a huge issue. And I think that's what's changing, is awareness in the level of activism. So we are seeing a boost in donations, but it's something that we know that we've needed a boost in donations for a while,
right?
Because we want to continue to expand our work that we're doing. And when you're faced with new crises, that only furthers the demand. So we do split some donations with national, to get technical about it.
Yeah, sure.
But it's generally on a delay, and it depends on the funds, and it's very complicated. And
so people, if they want to give, should give locally.
They should give locally and nationally as well. So I don't want to, our national ACLU has plenty of work to do, as we have seen as well. But it's great to see people, first-time activists. So I went to the Women's March in DC, and just to see how that has changed the landscape. And I went to the march locally here at the airport, and to see, I think there was my guess would be 2,000 people showed up, and that's unprecedented.
Yeah.
And especially the work that, I know that there's been some Roe activist trainings that NARAL has had.
Yes.
That have been very well attended. So it's people power that is so important right now.
Yeah. A lot of first-time activists too. I was also at the airport and met several people who were just out for the first time and trying to figure out, like, am I doing this right? Is this okay?
Yes, you are. You got off the couch. Step one. Check.
It's
Believe it or not, that's the one that so many people stumble on. Out the front door, go to the thing.
It's hard.
Yeah.
People have so much going on in their lives, and
yeah.
I really commend people for getting out there, and it can be intimidating. Like, how do I march? What do I say? What do I do?
Just show up.
Just show up.
We'll help you with step 2. You have to do step 1 on your own. Get off the couch.
It's what I say about meeting with your state legislators. It's just that step of doing it for the first time.
Yeah.
And especially, the national level is very important, but at the state level, we can make such a huge impact. As a former aide in the legislature, we used to say that a letter counts as 50 votes. Mm-hmm. And to think that you can have the impact of 50 people is pretty powerful at the state level. And these are the people that are making the laws that are harming us. It's your school system, it's your taxes, it's 19 abortion restrictions signed into law under the Kasich administration. It's things that impact us locally as well.
Right. Yeah.
I always have to make my pitch for state activism.
Okay. So our last segment we always do is called Let's Get It On. It's where we tell folks about what are upcoming events. Normally Randy on our staff sings Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye. Would either of you care to...
I don't think I'm as talented as Randy. I don't know Grant's singing skills.
Hate to break these coffee cups we have on the table here, so okay. I'll pass.
Upcoming events. Just first to clarify a past event. Last night we had a terrific comedy event, Stand Up for Choice, out at Ace of Cups here in Columbus. Absolutely just wall-to-wall, sold out, packed house, raised over $2,000. We're so very grateful to the comedians, to the venue, to the supporters who literally baked cupcakes and cookies with vulgar little sayings icinged onto them. Absolutely terrific event last night. So thank you to them. The next one for us is in Dayton. It's one of these row together activist events that Lisa mentioned. NARAL, Planned Parenthood, Women Have Options. I got to stop listing them because then I got to feel like I remember everybody in the group for our future and some other really cool groups. We'll put together this event. You can find information. It's this Saturday. If you still want to come, you can. Just RSVP. The link will be in the show notes. Last week, we heard from Stephanie Sherwood with Women Have Options. Their bowling event kickoff party is going to be on March 2nd at Pins, which is really cool. I play pinball there. And then they've got a Swap for Our Sisters clothing swap on March 25th, which is another really cool event. You can bring in a couple bags of gently used clothes and hand over $10, and then it's all you can carry out clothing. Wow. So yeah, it's a great clothing exchange fundraiser.
And it's for gender nonconforming as well.
Yes. And then that goes to benefit Women Have Options. So check out last week's episode if you want to learn more about that organization. And then on June 1st is an Equality Ohio event. This is Cincinnati Allies for Equality. What's that?
Every year we honor an ally in different cities in Ohio. And on June 1st, we're going to be honoring an ally yet to be named in the Cincinnati area. And it's always a really fun event to see somebody who is cisgender, who is straight, who is giving their all for LGBTQ equality. So it's usually a great time. If you follow us at Equality Ohio or get on our email list at equalityohio.org, then you'll know when we announce who the Ally of the Year is for 2017 in Cincinnati.
Cool. And we'll share your event for that when it pops up closer to that date on our Facebook page. So check out that. Where can people find information about ACLU?
ACLUofohio.org. And we're also on Facebook at ACLU of Ohio and Twitter as well.
Okay. And if you're ever in the State House, you'll find them pacing the halls and demanding to sue somebody. So it's pretty cool. Okay. Well, thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
See everybody next week. Bye. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you.
Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Jamie.
Hello.
Oh, I never stutter unless I'm on the phone or in front of a microphone, which is great for a guy with communications in his title.
I didn't hear any stutters. That was perfect.
You can, it's only way to do it is to do it.
Hey, you got to just go through.
I know it's the camera for me.
Yeah. I used to stutter a lot when I was a kid, but I just kind of grew out of it, unless I'm on the phone.
Just how it goes.
Thanks so much for coming last night, Jamie. That was awesome.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Fun, huh? Is that the word?